everyone. You stay so cold. I'm on the guitar. My favorite hollow on Lisa.
I love that song.
Yeah. Just giving everyone a couple minutes to log in. Pulling down silence. While you're lip on.
But I'll tell you one thing. If you leave, be a crying shame. And every breath and every word, I hear one name calling me out. But I'm from the fire. You hear my rhythm on your radio. You will feel the turning of the world. So soft and slow, turning you round and round. And if you said this life ain't good enough, I feel our world will lift you up. I can change my life. Never soon, no.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Margarita. I'm thrilled to welcome you once again to the 2019 Sacred Sex, Sacred Family Virtual Summit. Today we have such a special treat. We have Jhoselyn joining us. And I'm excited to introduce you, Jhoselyn. This woman is magical. She has magic in her hands, as I can personally attest, because I am lucky enough to have received her goddess massage rights. And I got to sign up for another one, Jhoselyn, because they are absolutely transformative. The healing that I've felt from experiencing your touch is indescribable. And I've been working for a long time on healing, but there's something about having that support and encouragement and wisdom from a person such as yourself, Joss. It's incredible. So y'all are really lucky that she's here with us. And my first sort of opening question for you, I know that you actually were kind of born into healing. Would you like to share with us a little bit about that, your roots as far as a healer?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Margarita, for having me here today and for allowing me to be part of this movement, because it's become a movement now where, you know, so many of us that are in this path of healing are able to share from our heart and from our experiences. I've been watching the videos and I'm just like, yes, like we're doing this, you know, we're sharing so much of our work and our passion and our path, and it's just been amazing. So yes, I'm originally from South America, from Ecuador. I was born and raised in Ecuador, and I was from a very early age exposed to healing modalities that are considered, you know, a little bit not as Western as we would think, you know, so like working with herbs, working with what we call sobadoras, like, which are women that massage your body to get rid of pain, get rid of negative energy, get rid of all of that. And also working with Mother Earth and plant medicine. So, like, all of that has been part of my lineage. But because I grew up in a city part of Ecuador, I was also very Americanized, because the United States back in the early 80s and 90s was like a superpower country. So everybody wanted to mimic that. So, my whole family kind of said, you need to become a doctor or a nurse or something. We moved to the States when I was 16 years old, in search of that, betterment for our professional life and our education and all of that. And because of my English at the time was very limited, I did not get to go to medical school. So, but I noticed that I wanted to work with medicine and healing, continue that path. I was still being cold. So I went to nursing school and became a nurse. And that was over 16 years ago. And I'm still a practicing nurse. I work as an emergency room nurse in a very, very busy level 1 Toronto State Hospital. And I love it. It's a very busy, it can be very stressful. But I continue doing that, because it's part of my path. But as I started doing that, I also noticed that the calling of other healing modalities were really just there all the time. And kind of like you in the summit, spirit calls you and just doesn't leave you alone, just keeps yelling at you until you pay attention. And, so I began exploring mostly for self-healing and for self-work. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, I started the journey with yoga, so learning about yoga. What is that? Meditation. What is that? Then energy. What is that? What are crystals? What are this? What is that? And then really getting back into basically my roots, so exploring my roots, my country's lineage, my indigenous roots, and what they meant and how to incorporate that into all that I do. So I studied, energy healing. I became a tantra practitioner. I work with herbal medicine. I have done an extensive amount of work in learning about sexual health and sexual education. And, basically all of that has brought me here to where I am today. I go back to Ecuador at least once a year and connect now to a Shuar shaman, part of indigenous culture in the Amazon, and really learn and dig deeper into that part of my life, and I really am feeling like I'm finally in the path that I needed to be in, which is bringing both the Eastern and the Western world together, to just provide healing, So yeah.
Wow. So you're basically the perfect guest for the Sacred Sex, Sacred Family Summit.
Thank you.
Yes. And I absolutely adore your topic, which is pleasure, all about pleasure. And the actual topic is pleasure, good for the whole family. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So, when we were talking about this summit, and, you said, I would love for you to speak. I'm like, what do you want me to talk about? There's so much out there. And pleasure has always been one of my biggest topics out there because of what I do. As a practitioner, I am able to help women and really almost anyone kind of get in tune and in touch with what pleasure is. And if you look at the definition of pleasure, is just a feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment. A lot of us can connect pleasure to something that's more sexual and more taboo a lot of the times, but really what pleasure is a feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment. And that can be sexual or it could be non-sexual, so really it could be accessed by anyone at any time, at any age. And the fundamental purpose of pleasure, it's really a motivator, right? Because if you are exposed to pleasure and you receive pleasure, then you kind of want to do that more because, we're wired in our brains and we're wired in our bodies to seek pleasurable experiences. So like if you taste something that's sour and it doesn't really taste good to you, you're probably not going to have that again. But if you taste something that's really delicious and just really wakes up parts of your body that you're like, ooh, that is so good, and you do the happy dance while you're eating it, you're probably going to seek to have that again. So pleasure really is a motivator, both in getting us to act in a certain way, and it serves as a purpose also for propagation and to evolve our human experience, right? And to better our species. So that's why I think we're in an era now that we can receive pleasure from so many places. So like you no longer are just boxed into trying the food of your culture. Now you can go to a different culture and experience that pleasure. You know, experience their music, experience their everything. You know, so we're bettering our experiences just by seeking pleasure. Pleasure also uses a reward part of our system and in our brain, and that's where really pleasure, orgasms, senses are born. It's in our brain. So if you think about that, you know, everything is really in your mind, and in your brain. All that is pleasurable comes from your brain. And parts of our brain are parts that regulate our emotions, our oxytocin, which is that bonding, trusting, loving hormone that gets released first thing when you give birth and you receive that baby, or when you're breastfeeding, or when you're releasing sexual hormones and you're having orgasms, and that bonds you to your partner. You know, oxytocin is like one of the most amazing hormones we have in order to be able to kind of keep us alive, right? Because if you felt nothing when your baby was born, or you felt nothing when you breastfed your baby, you probably would forget about that. You know, be like, why do I need to do this again? You know, but oxytocin is such a powerful hormone that we seek that pleasure, and we seek that. So we get that oxytocin flowing, you know. And also the pituitary gland kind of releases endorphins, and that decreases pain. So pain is also something, some people find pain as pleasure, and that is okay. You know, everybody is different in how they wire their brain synapses to kind of associate pain with pleasure, or, you know, soft touch and pleasure. And everyone is different, and that just depends on the person. So if you think about, when does pleasure begin? So I was reading a lot of, in preparation for this summit, I was reading about that, because I'm like, well, when does really pleasure begin? Because if you can't, you know, you can't really pinpoint in your brain the moment that you felt pleasure for the first time, or, you know, the first time that you kind of like touched yourself or felt something that you were like, ooh, that feels good. You know, so I was watching this documentary about how they caught a part of the ultrasound of a woman that was pregnant. And in the ultrasound, they noticed this little boy, a fetus in the womb, that had grasped the penis, and they were doing a motion of masturbation. So, like, we are already wired for pleasure from the moment we are conceived. Our brain is one of the first organs to kind of, you know, be formed. So if you think about that, if our brain is one of the first organs to be formed, then all those little hormones get released early on to be able to experience pain, pleasure, and seek that from the moment we're in our mother's womb, right? So I was like, wow, so we really are conceived, and we're like already knowing what pleasure is supposed to be. And really it's society and our fears and our shame and everything else that kind of takes us away from that, you know. So we begin to explore early in our childhood. So if you're a parent, you know that when your kids are toddlers, they put everything in their mouth, or they want to touch everything, and they want to feel everything, and they don't care if it's hot, prickly, pinchy, you know, sticky, any of that. They don't care. They just want to feel. They want to feel what that feels like, what the pleasure of it is. And you know, I can think of my kids like running in the sand on the beach and asking you to like bury them in the sand, because what does that feel like? You know, so like all this pleasures and exploration of our bodies that we are wired to have from like very early beginning. And then as we get older, we start kind of like pulling away from that, you know, or only focusing on certain pleasures and pulling away from the exploration of what pleasure is really about. So we can start teaching our kids about pleasure really, really early. So, you know, teaching them the basics is what the world is really focused on, which is like sex is this, and you get pregnant and you can contact an STD, and that's it. You know, and we leave out so much more that there is to sex and exploration and pleasure, that can be really something that will change their whole experience about sexuality, sensuality, sacredness, you know. Or, you know, so if you explore all of this with them, then you're kind of like allowing them to have an experience as an adult that will allow for all those things to happen. But if you don't, which is what we're experiencing nowadays, then you get a lot of people out there that have sexual dysfunction, right? Because we don't equate one with the other. You know, we think that people are just wired to be dysfunctional or have issues with their sexuality. But in reality, if you go back, and I've done this with a lot of my clients that, for example, have never experienced an orgasm, they go back and they can pinpoint almost the first time that they felt shame about their sexual organs, and they felt shame about orgasm or the feeling of it, you know, and a lot of that has brought them to a place of dysfunction. So, you know, if we are able, as people that are changing, are looking more into this type of helping our children grow up in a healthier state, you know, we look at health and we bring forward eating healthy, exercising, you know, even meditations in there, and mental health. But a lot of times we forget about sexuality, and that's the first part that brought us here to begin with. You know, so if sexual health was part of our everyday teachings with our kids, then they would become like really amazing, well-rounded individuals. And also it will change us, because we get to also explore what has made us uncomfortable with certain parts about sex, you know, and sexuality and pleasure. So, you know, and that can also bring conversations about consent and boundaries and being present in your body. So one of the exercises that I do with my children is we take a minute, right? And we explore our senses. So, and that is really the base word of sensuality, or, you know, it's senses. So we take a minute and I put it on a timer. I'm like super, like, I love timers. So I'll do timers for a lot of things. So we'll do timer and we'll do it for a minute, and I'll ask them to close their eyes. And they close their eyes, and I ask them, what do you hear? What can you hear? And sometimes they'll hear birds. Sometimes they'll hear, you know, a truck passing by. And I'll ask them, what do you smell? And, you know, maybe if I cooked, they'll say, oh, I smell the dinner you made, or I smell the cat litter box, or something like that, you know. What do you taste? You know, and they'll say, I taste the juice I just drank, or I taste the gum I just chewed on. And I'll ask them, what do you feel on your skin? And they'll say, well, it feels cold, or it feels warm, or I feel prickly from the sweater that I'm wearing. And then I ask them to open their eyes, and it's like, what do you see? And, you know, they'll say, I see you, mommy, or I'll see this, or I'll see the flowers. And those are things that are allowing them to kind of be present in their body, be present into the emotions that they're feeling, and also be present into, you know, the gamma of experiences that they'll have. So like, for example, like the litter box probably isn't a pleasant smell, but it's still something that they're able to tune into. So that, you know, if they're having itchy skin from their sweater, they're also able to tune into that, and they can kind of voice it instead of not really knowing what they feel, you know, which is what a lot of us grown-ups have grown into, not really knowing what we feel. So we just go with the flow of how things happen, right? And a lot of us grown-ups have been in that place where we're unable to feel, so we become numb, or we become, you know, kind of like we censor out feeling, or we become hypersensitive. And that could be something that, you know, we can also practice this 1 minute of like getting in touch with what we're feeling now in this moment in your body, in the present. So yeah, so how do you introduce pleasure to your kids? Because that's something that I question a lot, right? You know, like, is that something that you can teach your kids early? And I say, yeah, absolutely. And you can start as early as possible, as early as your child is able to interact with you. And that's pretty early. So like, you know, for me, the most important part is really teaching pleasure to yourself first. So like doing something like stopping and smelling a rose so that you can get that sense of like pleasure, what that feels like, you know, or taking a moment when you take your first sip of coffee and like really enjoying that, you know, and asking yourself how it's making you feel. Or once again, I use a timer where when I get out of the bathroom, I'll put a timer for 5 minutes to lotion myself. Because most of us, what we do is we get out of the bathroom, we lotion ourselves, and we get going because we got this to do and that to do in school and then blah, 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 right? But 5 minutes is nothing. 5 minutes is gone in no time. But if you take the 5 minutes, you really get to take time to like, oh, my one arm, my neck, my legs. You know, one of my Tantra teachers told me that we are so disconnected from what our body feels like and how pleasure is that we cannot close our eyes and think about how our shoulder feels without moving it or touching it. You know, and I was like, wow, you're so right. Like if I at the time didn't know what my calf muscle felt like if I didn't squeeze it or touch it or anything like that. You know, it was just a part of my body that was there and didn't really do anything, you know, outside of everything that it does for me, you know. So we're so disconnected from our body. So like really getting in touch with ourselves first. And then, you know, taking the time to get in touch with our children's pleasure experiences. So one of the greater times for me is, and this I had to think a lot about because as parents, sometimes we treat our kids like they're in an assembly line, right? So we feed them, we wash them, we lotion them, we dress them, we put them to bed, and then it's like, finally I'm done, you know, and the assembly line is over. But you don't understand that those are all moments that you can actually interact and have pleasure moments with your child. So like for my daughters, I'll wash their hair and I'm shampooing and I'm like, hey, do you like your scalp scratched? Hey, do you like is the water warm enough? Is it hot? How does it feel on your skin? Or as I'm lotioning their back, like, do you like this amount of pressure or is this too much? Do you like it rubbed here? Where do you want me to rub you? You know? And they'll say things like, oh, mommy, that really feels good. Or, oh, that tickles. Please don't touch me there. You know, so that also gives them a moment to once again exercise boundaries, exercise consent, and exercise what they're feeling on their body. So they're learning all this as children. And guess what? When they get to their partner, as they get older, they're able to say, ooh, you know, don't touch me there. That feels wrong for me right now. Or it doesn't feel right now. Or, ooh, wait, this feels good. Can you touch me there? And, you know, for those of us that are having now, I have a 10-year-old that's beginning to ask questions about sexuality. So, you know, yes, as every parent, I do cringe as well. Even though I'm a sexual educator, I inside, without making a face, I go, ooh, I'm not ready, you know. But at the same time, I have to understand that she's growing and she's gonna have questions, you know, and she's gonna want to explore. And if I don't provide her the information, somebody else will. And that's something that you have to kind of always remember, that if you don't provide the information, you're not a source where your children feel comfortable talking about pleasure, pain, sexuality, sensuality, all that stuff. There are other sources. And nowadays, there's so many sources that you'd rather them not learn from. So, you know, that's something that I have kind of like learned to be able to kind of flow through with my children. And also show them that it's okay to feel pleasurable moments that are not necessarily um, connected to sex. So like they'll see me and my partner, like they'll rub my shoulders and I'll say, oh, that really feels good. Thank you so much. Can you rub my right one more? Because that one's really sore. Or, you know, rubbing my husband's head and he'll say, oh, that feels really nice. Or, you know, can you scratch here or whatever, you know, so they're able to also witness moments that are pleasurable to other people without feeling like ooh or turning away or feeling like it's shameful, you know. Um, and ask them about touching different parts of their body and ask them what that feels like. You know, what does your hand feel like? What does your arm feel like? Using different tools, like for example, like feathers. You know, what does a feather touch feel like? Or what does a prickly feel like? You know, touching different things that will bring different types of tactile touch to them, or having them smell different smells. Like if you were to uh, say an emotion that matches a type of smell, like for example, a rose. You know, if you smell a rose, what emotion do you think of when you smell a rose? And some will say happy, and some will say love, and some will say, you know, kisses. So like any word that comes up to them, and allow them to express that. And then if you smell something like, I don't know, something sour or something pungent like cheese, you know, what does that smell that like? And they'll be like, ooh, that smells like, you know, like feeling disgusting or feeling, you know, angry or feeling whatever. So you ask them, you know, to kind of associate emotions with different types of senses and feelings, so that they're making that connection in their brain, that they're allowed to be expressive about their emotions and their pleasure and their what they're feeling and what they're having going through in their body. And then that's when you can introduce things like boundaries, and starting as early as possible. That is key to having that come up, you know. Body autonomy is a big one. So allowing them to understand that I have a body, they have a body, everyone has a body, and everyone is allowed to make the choices they want with their body, as long as it doesn't harm them or themselves. So like if I want to, you know, if they see somebody that has piercings all over their face and they're like, oh, mommy, that has to be painful. Yeah, it could be, but that's their body, and they have the choice to make what they want with their body, because it's their body autonomy, you know, and it's not harming you. And, you know, it may be harming themselves, but to them, that's their pleasure. So you have to be accepting of that. The next one could be discussing environmental practices, right? So like in my home, there are times that we walk around naked, and it's okay, and nobody says anything, and it's not anything that's shameful, and it's not anything that we're like, ah, ha, ha, you know, this and that, but also it provides a safe space to have certain conversations like body hair, or like, you know, why are boys different than girls, or like all things that can come up. But environmental privacy also gives you the opportunity to say, hey, we can't just get undressed at school and walk around naked there either. You know, so like there are certain places that is okay to do certain things. So that's what environmental privacy in that discussion is about. Teaching them that no is a sentence, a complete sentence. No. And if they say no, honor that, because that is something that will allow them to understand if they're receiving pleasure and now they don't want it, saying no or stop is okay, or if there's something that from the back doesn't feel pleasurable and they say no and it's honored, then they know that it's respected and they also know when that is not something that's allowed. What else? Teaching them not about good touch and bad touch because that can kind of scramble their brains a little bit. I like to use safe touch and unsafe touch because a hug can be safe when it comes from your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister. But then there could be other people that could potentially give you an unsafe hug, and they have to understand the difference because if they think about hugs all being good and never bad, and only if they touch me here or touch my genitals, then that's bad. Then, then hugs can linger and hugs can turn into other things. And they don't know that because my mommy or my daddy told me that hugs are good, but if something feels unsafe, to learn them and teach them that that's okay, to provide that safe space to allow them to feel safe. And also, like, for example, with my kids, like, even though I cringe when they ask me certain questions, I have to understand that they're coming to me for information. And anytime they share something, I cannot meet them with dismissiveness or with an anger response or with punishment or with this necessity to be able to take action right there, right? So if my daughter comes home and tells me that a kid touched her butt, I can't be like, what? I can't believe he did that. Da, 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 da. I can't do that because then that's teaching her that I'm having a response that God forbid she ever tells me she touched somebody's butt, that I'm going to react the same way and I'm going to be super reactive to her stuff, right? So instead, I have to take a deep breath or even tell her, hey, that conversation is making me a little uncomfortable. I'm going to take a minute to get back to you. And they understand that because they may have that time where you're like, hey, I want to discuss pleasure with you today. And they'll be like, Mommy, that conversation is going to make me a little uncomfortable right now. Can we take the time and come back to it another time? And tell them, yeah, just tell me when you're ready. I'll be here for you, So making time and making space for them to be able to discuss things with you so that they know that you're not going to be reactionary, so that they can have that safe space. And also, I like to ask my children for them to choose who their trusted adults are to discuss certain things with, because I may want to think that I'm the trusted adult, but maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to me about certain things. So they may choose an auntie or an uncle or a cousin, that's older. And as long as I know and they know that they are the trusted adult that they confide in, and everybody's in agreement of this, then, that's okay. You don't always have to be that person. And also, going back to pleasure, teaching them that no matter what age you are, that there is always going to be pleasurable experiences for you. It could be grandma, like, for example, my grandfather, he is wheelchair bound. But something that's really pleasurable to him, and you can tell because he's nonverbal now too, is when somebody rubs his head because he still smiles, and he's able to kind of put his head where he's being rubbed. Or my grandmother, she enjoys having her nails painted, so that brings forth pleasure. And that you can also bring that forward to your children and say, hey, this is a pleasurable experience for grandma. Maybe we should make time for that. And, you know, children are always going to seek stuff for them to feel good. So, like ice cream or experiences or going to a jump house or going to pet a dog or anything. It's always going, children are very clear in what they're seeking. They're seeking pleasure. And for me, it's almost like you have to learn from them as opposed to us teaching them a lot of the time, right? Because they will teach us and they will let us know what is, what is pleasurable, what is good, what is not okay, you know. So maybe take a day to do the backwards dance, where your kids are the ones that are captains of the ship for one day, and you'll be surprised with all the pleasurable experiences you get to explore. But yeah, that's basically what I have to share.
Wow. So much goodness here. I'm just like soaking it up, and then I was getting a little stressed out taking notes, and I was like, no, this is gonna be available later. Like I can go back and write things down later. So that that was just a good feeling for me. I was like, okay, yeah, don't need to get stressed out about remembering everything.
Right. Take the pleasure to be here.
Yes, exactly, and just being present. I love that you included these examples because I'm like, yes, I want to implement everything with my kids, and as well as with myself. Like um, really seeking out pleasurable experiences. I think there's so much shame and fear around even the idea of that, right? Like, do you experience that, or do you see that with your clients? There's like this kind of a block against really feeling pleasure and going toward pleasure.
Yeah. And even redefining pleasure for themselves, because there's a lot of things that are pleasurable that could be taboo for other people, you know. Um, and it's always about being safe, being sound consent, and also not causing harm. So, like, if those bases are being covered, then the world is your oyster. You can explore so many forms of pleasure and have it be part of your life. And the more you learn about it, the more you explore, the more you're able to kind of feel safe in that and feel less shame about it. And not every type of pleasure that we experience is meant to be talked about with everyone, because not everyone is going to understand it. That's another thing that you have to kind of even bring up to my kids. I tell them often, your mommy is super open with things. Your mommy will teach you about everything. However, other children's mommy may not. So when you go to school and you tell them this, girls have vulvas and clitorises and boys have penises and they're all organs for pleasure. They may not be received quite as open. So, like, even teaching that perhaps not everyone is as open to everything all the time. And, even being okay with that for yourself, you know?
Yeah, and but also like this idea, and I think you've mentioned this, that like the possibility of transformation, of transforming your relationship to pleasure is always there. Like how old is like your oldest client?
My oldest client is 76 years old.
Wow.
Yes. And he's a male, a guy, heterosexual male. And he came to me because he felt that he was not good in bed. And he had this relationship with his wife for like over 20 years. And he wanted to explore how to be better in his sexual expression. And I was like, you're already better because you're coming and you're accepting and opening up yourself to saying, I want to be better at sex at 76 years old, and knowing that sexuality does not stop at a certain age, you know. And
You.
he found me basically because he had gone to his urologist, he had gone to a therapist, he had gone to you know, other practitioners, and everyone basically had told him like, you're 76, that part of your life is over.
Wow.
And I took a step back and I said, what? What do you mean that part of your life is over? You know, like that should be a part of your life that should never go away. You know, exploring your sensuality, exploring your sexuality, like learning new things about your body. That should never go away, you know? So we began exploring his his you know, expansiveness of pleasure and how it doesn't just focus in your genitalia, you know, because he was like, well, you know, I'm 76, so certain parts of my body no longer work as they used to, you know. So I'm like, absolutely, I understand that, but like, do you understand that there are other parts of your body that are sensual and sensuous and pleasurable, you
Yeah.
know, and also that your wife at 74 also has parts of her body that are sensual and pleasurable that do not involve the genitalia, you know. So we had began exploring all those parts, and it's like a reawakening because he was always taught, and he grew up very much in the church, in the Christian church. So like even having impure thoughts were something that you went to hell for, you know. So now he's like toying with the idea, and I've told him, I was like, fantasize often and fantasize as much as you can, you know, because your brain is like amazing at that and it brings you so much pleasure. So initially it was really a path for him because he always thought about fantasies being something that led him to be to hell, to go to hell.
Hmm.
So yeah.
That's so beautiful that he was open to learning. Like just creating that space for the possibility of learning and improving and finding out something new. And man, I hope I'm there at 76.
You're gonna be in like in such an amazing place. Like I aim to being 90 and being sexually active. You know, that's where I aim at. And studies have shown that people that are sexually active at late age still, you know, they live longer and they live happier lives, and their hearts are pumping and healthy, and their blood pressures, their cholesterol levels, you know, their stress levels are like way lower. So yes, we should aim at being sexually active at a late stage in our life. You know, and also if you're having sexual dysfunctions in your body, it's usually kind of like an alarm system. You know, if things are not working in your sex organs, it's usually because things are beginning to not work in other major organs, like your brain, like your heart, like your lungs, like your kidneys. Those organs that we cannot live without, right? So usually if there's dysfunctions in the sexual organs, that usually you have to kind of make sure that the major ones are working well, and you know, you don't have things like high blood pressure or lung issues or brain issues or kidney issues. And if those are flowing well, you'll notice that your sex health and your sexual organs continue to function no matter how long you live, you know?
I love this. I have a question brewing, but I wanted to open up the floor for those of you who are on live. Feel free to type a question or comment into the chat. If you want to call out something that was particularly useful to you, or if you'd like to go deeper and ask Jhoselyn a question, please feel free to do that. And would be happy if you wanted to come off of mute and say your question out loud to the group. No pressure to do that, but the floor is open for questions. Oh, awesome. Comment, question from Maya. This was really helpful. I will be sharing some of this with my daughter later today, especially safe versus unsafe touches instead of good versus bad touches. That really touched me as well. I hadn't been using good and bad touch, but the safe and unsafe just, yeah, it sounds a lot more skillful for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because kids like there's such a broad statement to words like good and bad. You know, like, and even when they describe themselves, like, I'm being bad today. Like, I don't like saying that because what exactly does that mean? Like, you know, what does being bad mean?
Yeah.
And what does being good mean? You know,
Yeah.
so like being safe, being unsafe, being exploratory, being non-exploratory, being, you know, I'm being like there's so many other words that we could use that could produce a um, better kind of guidance of where they are, you know?
Yeah. So my question that just came to me was um, just thinking about how you had mentioned that uh, pleasure exists like throughout the whole body, not just the genitals. And for better or for worse, I definitely get a sense that in our culture, men are not as familiar with that concept as women. Um, this is something I've experienced personally, as well as for my girlfriends and clients. Just that it seems like men are kind of like singularly focused on that one thing, on like just getting to the vagina. Um, and as women, a lot of times we are in this role of kind of putting on the brakes, or at least that's what it feels like. Where really all we're asking for is for like a more whole exploration, instead of going right for the vagina, right? So I just wanted to ask you for any tips as far as having that conversation with your partner, and like guidance on how to um, facilitate that.
Right. Well, it's interesting to me in a way that, you know, this really comes from the basis of consent because we really don't talk about consent outside of being a yes or a no, right? What are you consenting to? So, like, those are the things that we should really explore. And I think in a lot of heteronormative relationships, when a woman say yes, then that automatically means yes to penis and the vagina sex.
Yeah.
So that automatically means yes to oral sex. That automatically means yes to my breast being in your mouth or on your hand. But that's not really what it should mean. You know, consent to saying yes in a sexual way should mean so much more. Like, hey, you know, I would like to have a conversation about what our consent means and how I would like to explore that. So perhaps we can take the time to explore our bodies outside of our genitalia, you know, and we can leave that at the end of our exploration, you know. And if you're with somebody already in a relationship, like for example, with my partners, I take time to say, hey, today I would love to explore you outside of your genitalia. So, like, take the time to massage you, or take the time to speak words of affirmations to your body, or words of affirmations to you. Like, I love the way you look at me. I love the way your eyes are brown and so deep and just penetrate me in ways that I cannot even explain. You know, I love the way you smile and how your smile makes me smile. And I love the way your voice sounds. And, you know, just allow yourself to kind of have those moments with your partner that kind of takes away the pressure of sex, you know, because that's something also that men grow into. You know, there's so much pressure for men to be able to perform. There's so much pressure for men to be able to, you know, give women this type of orgasm and that type of orgasm and make them squirt and make them do that and make them do this, you know, where men or our partners are just not really sitting back and saying, well, how does the rest of her body feel? Or how does the rest of my body feel? I had my partner, one of my partners, like, I gave him a body massage and he said nobody had ever touched my knees.
Wow.
What? You know, what do you mean nobody had ever touched your knee? You know, and how did that feel? And you know, and it brought up a moment, you know, for him to be able to kind of be like, wow, that was such a pleasurable experience. Because also us as women, we focus on the genitalia of men.
Yeah.
You know, that's where we think we gotta go every time. And it's not the truth. Human beings, whether you're heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, we have just our whole body to explore. It's not just about, you know, the organs that kind of brought us here. There's so much more, you know?
Mm,
Yeah.
sure. We have a question from Gaddy. What advice do you have for parents that want to foster a more open conversation with their kids, but unsure how / where to start?
Ask them. Ask them. I ask my kids, like, hey, I want to have a conversation about your body today. Is there anything around your body that you would like to talk about? Or, hey, I noticed that, for example, with my oldest daughter, I noticed that she was growing hair under her armpit. You know, and I was like, hey, I noticed that you were growing some hair under your armpits. Is there anything you want to talk about with that? You know, or just making moments of conversation, like if you want to talk about sex specific, you know, sit down with them and say, hey, I actually am stealing this line from a friend of mine, Michael Gibson, who gives an amazing class, and I want to have an adult conversation with you surrounding the topic of sex. And that's okay. You know, I want to have an adult, because you're the adult, so you're going to be guiding the conversation. And you can say, I want to have an adult conversation with you regarding the topic of your penis, your vulva, your clitoris, your breast, and you know, and addressing those parts of your body by name, anatomically correct name,
Mm,
not your fifi or your, you know, your pee or your this, you know, because I think we're in an era now where those words are more accepted and are able to be called forward by the true names, you know?
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Love that advice. Oh my goodness. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour. I don't want to let you go. um, Again, the floor is open for maybe we could take one more question. If anyone wants to jump on, just you can just unmute yourself. If you have any comments or questions, we would love to hear from you.
Hi, this is Maya. Can you hear me?
Yes, Maya.
Yes, Maya.
I just wanted to say thank you to both of you very much for sharing this information. And, you know, I just really appreciate it. And thank you for creating this platform.
You're so welcome. It's so great that you're here.
Oh, Margarita, you're muted.
So I was just saying, while folks are maybe still thinking of a comment or question they want to share, I wanted to ask, how do we keep up with you? How do we get in touch with you? How do we contact you? What's the way that we can find you?
Well, I have a website. It's called La Vida Divine. And I also have an Instagram page called La Vida Divine. Basically, all my platforms are under my business name, La Vida Divine. And I am on Facebook, Jhoselyn Catalina Thomas. I have events coming up. You know, I'm going to start doing them some online for folks that are, you know, not in the tri-state New York City area. I work one-on-one and on group settings, and I will be traveling. Some of my traveling dates are on the website as well. But yeah, that's where I am. You know, I wanted to also touch base with the sacred sexuality part of it. You know, as being a tantra practitioner, like being able to teach your kids about that part, you know, that could be something that you can also explore. Like with my kids, I let them know that there are chakras, and that could be something as simple that you can begin exploring with your children, like chakras. Like, what are chakras, and how do we get in touch with our chakras, and what do our chakras feel like, and what colors are they? You know, so it's something very simple. That can also bring them pleasure and open them up to maybe more possibilities of how to explore their pleasure zones, you know. Because if you see women or men that are into tantric practices, they can experience pleasure without touching, you know, and pleasure or orgasms just by being in touch with their breath. So if that's something that you can explore with your kids as they get older and as they begin to have a better and bigger understanding of their bodies and their sexuality and their sacredness of it, then perhaps they won't be as pressed to release those hormones by engaging in sexual activity that perhaps they're not ready to. Like, I wish somebody would have told me about, you know, orgasmic breath or my chakras being able to be, you know, cultivate that sexual energy so that I wouldn't have had to, you know, engage in intercourse as early, you know. Perhaps that would have been something that would have been helpful, and I would have been able to find more boundaries and more ways of exploring my body. So, you know, maybe that's something that you can also explore with your kids and with yourself.
Beautiful. Yes. Another question coming from Philip Cope. Could you discuss the old cultural belief and attitude that pleasure is a bad thing, that spiritually suffering and pain are ways of achieving merit, if spiritual development, so that suppression of pleasure is somehow a good thing?
Right. We do that so much in a lot of the practices, you know, where we fast ourselves, we um, pull away from pleasurable experiences as to create this pious, you know, environment around us. But what we have to understand is that there should be about a balance in our life, right? And a lot of the spiritual or religious practices, they have kind of like focused too much on one side of the balance and not on the other. So that's where it has brought this feelings of guilt and fear and shame, you know, where we should be able to be balanced individuals. So, for example, for my practice, I do go on times of celibacy, you know, where I don't explore my body in a pleasurable way, or I don't have sexual or intimate relationships with any of my partners. And that allows me to cultivate my energy in a certain way. But I also, once I break that fast, I allow myself to experience the pleasure that I can. You know, it's about balance. It's about being able to connect both of them and not having one be better than the other, you know, and also about choice. If it's your choice to kind of be celibate and not explore sexuality and fast from pleasure, then it's a choice that should be allowed to be had, you know, without feeling shame, without feeling fear, or feeling that you're going to be punished in some way for experiencing one or the other. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great.
But yeah, like they are old cultural beliefs, you know, so they come from a place of not really knowing the power of certain things that we can explore, you know. And I think as we're becoming more into the new age, quote unquote, part of it, you know, we're getting back to where we really came from. We came from a place of pleasure. You know, most of us came from a place of pleasure, and that should be where we try to return to.
Oh, I just love this so much. Wow. Oh, there's a follow-up. There is a spiritual developmental value of cultivating pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pleasure as spiritual. I love that.
Pleasure as a spirituality movement, you know, and you can bring that into anything. You can sing a spiritual song and feel pleasure in your body. Like I've sometimes, you know, I'm singing or I'm drumming in spiritual practices, and I feel it throughout my body, and it feels so good, and you want to continue, and there should be no shame in that, you know. There should be no shame in feeling pleasure from things that are part of your spiritual practice.
Yeah, and in a way, that's like a sign that you're on the right track, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we're filled with spirit, you know.
Oh my goodness, this has been so lovely. I'm gonna bring this gathering to a close. Thank you so much, Jhoselyn. This was wonderful. And like I said, I'm definitely checking the replay for this one because you shared so many nuggets. So I want to keep track, and I want to implement with my family and see what happens.
Sweet. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're such a lovely guest. All right, everybody. Tasha said, get the recording. Yes. She says she loves you, Josh. We love you.
Love you.
Oh, enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Have a pleasurable Friday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.